Hi, this is Ed from Wright. I know it's been a couple weeks since I've done a video. I've just been really busy doing a number of different things, which has been good. But I'm excited to get back here and talk about some issues. Today we're going to talk about sort of the mower market, some of the economics and supply chain issues that are going on in the background, not necessarily product today. We do have some plans for some good product videos coming up in the future here. And I've done a couple videos kind of like this, but I want to do this again because the nuances always change of what's happening out there, what we see. And I think it's also like, why do I talk about these things? I think one part of it is that many of the people that watch our YouTube channel, like yourself, are loyal Wright owners. And I want you to have the best inside information that you can have in terms of, your product availability picture, what's going on out there, help you understand what's going on in the manufacturing business to help you make the best choices for your company. So I also want to be sure Wright owners are having a priority in terms of what equipment is out there, what's going on. So just for the context of this, Wright, what has happened over the past 2 years or so is that mower sales have peaked significantly, and there's a lot of mowers that are commercial mowers, and within those mowers, a certain amount of mowers are being sold to what I refer to as revenue generating businesses like yours, and then a certain amount of those commercial mowers are sold to property owners who need a commercial mower, and they have a professional aptitude or approach to maintaining maybe their 5 or 10 acres, and they buy a commercial mower. Now, it happens to be that with the pandemic and all that's happened, a lot of people have reinvested a lot more in their own properties in these more larger property owner areas. So there's a ton of equipment that is sold to property owners. The commercial business has grown somewhat, but that's not really the underlying issue that's created the supply, the spike in demand necessarily. Commercial business is strong, it's growing, but that's not the underlying tension that's being created here. So one thing to understand about the mower manufacturing business is that mowers are extremely seasonal. A ton of mowers get sold in about 2 months in the spring, but they're made throughout the year steadily. And so if a lot of inventory pulls through and manufacturers are producing at that steady rate, it could take anywhere between 2 or 3 times the capacity to simultaneously rebuild inventory and keep up with retail sales. My analogy for this is, say you're towing a heavy trailer and you're going up a mountain and you have the gas pedal down 2/3 of the way and you press a little bit extra, almost nothing happens when you're climbing that hill. Now, if you're on flat ground and you press the gas pedal down for the other third, and you do that a couple miles before you get to the mountain, you'll gain a lot of speed that'll help you up the mountain. And so that's how this manufacturing business works, right? You can vary production to change your speed so that you get through this peak of spring, but when both the inventory is low and the retail is high, it takes, like I said, 2 to 3 times as much capacity to do that. And so that's part of what, although we'd all love to have 2 to 3 times as much capacity, the reality is you can't just plug that kind of capacity in immediately. So that capacity constraint could be anything from manufacturing equipment to people, and it varies really depending on the supplier or the mower manufacturer that's out there. A lot of our suppliers are in small town America, where they do have a very tight labor market, and there aren't enough people for them to build more of what their customers are asking for. You've got other places, so we're actually kind of an unfortunate situation that here where we are in Maryland, we're in a city of more than 100,000 people. And so I'm not going to say that labor is a constraint to our capacity, but it's much less of an issue than it is to some other folks that are out there, and especially our suppliers. So it really varies between factory equipment and personnel, and can be a blend of both those things. So what I described here as some of the prosumer equipment that's being sold in pretty high volume, what happens there is that, for example, many of the same pistons or drivetrains or whatever, there are components that are in those mowers that are the same components that are in many commercial mowers. And so the growth in that segment has created constraints on the commercial segment because we share the same supplier base. And that's part of what's happening upstream of us from a capacity standpoint. Now, earlier in this year, we definitely had big challenges when it came to the domestic supply chain issues. And I think a lot of that's in the past. Yes, freight is up very significantly. There's a shortage of, there's more freight than there are trucks and drivers. And so that is a challenge, but typically means that things just run behind schedule a little bit. It's not that things can't get done. So domestically, I think we're coming through some of this, but what's happening more and more so recently is that there's a certain import dependency that we have, and that issue is getting worse. And it's not that very much of our mowers have parts that come from China. There's actually a ton of material content that comes from the U.S., especially right within the several states around us. But inside of a component, there could be a bolt or something like this that's imported, and so there is this missing part syndrome that happens both within our business and within our suppliers' businesses, and that's to a certain extent what's jamming up the system. And what happens is that if a supplier has a component that they can't get to finish their product to give to us when we build a mower, then we have a line that goes down for a certain amount of time, and that's lost capacity. That's hard to make back up again. And so we're steadily producing a lot of equipment, but we can't produce 110%, you might say, of what we would normally want to do. We're producing some number less than that because there's always some broken link somewhere in there. And so all of us in the manufacturing business are losing capacity at some level due to this component dependency. Let's say it takes 1,200 parts to make a mower, and as soon as one doesn't show up, that becomes a problem. Now, from a import dependency standpoint, I don't see this getting better for a long time. And there's a few things that cause this. First is that there is a pre-existing issue with shipping containers and ocean freight, stuff getting held up in docks. The docks are overwhelmed. They don't know where your container is. You're at the bottom of a pile. For them to dig out, your container doesn't get released for a long time. These kinds of issues are happening and creating a lot of chaos. So that's kind of the first issue that's been happening for a while. It's still happening, and it's still going to get worse. The second issue here is that in Asia, how they're handling the pandemic is pretty significant. They'll shut a port down due to 2 or 3 people getting sick. Same thing with factories. And so as that happens, that makes this problem even worse. The third issue here, I would say somewhat, is that there is a huge amount of imported goods leading up to Christmas. And if you read the news, you already hear about how there's a lot of items that would normally be available for Christmas holidays, or major retailers that put on Black Friday sales for these products. A lot of these companies, they're not even going to do Black Friday sales. And there's going to be a lot of stuff that just isn't there, is not on sale. So we're going into that, which takes a huge amount of this import capacity that's out there. Then the other thing that follows on this is that in China, the way industry works is a lot different than the U.S. In the U.S., a lot of people work for a business that's in the town that they live in, that their family lives in, that kind of thing. But in China, a certain amount of people, what they do is they go to an industrial city for their job, and then they go back to their hometown periodically, and they have the Chinese New Year, where a lot of people go to their hometown and get together with their friends and relatives for an extended amount of time every winter. And the normal cycle of business is that a lot of these companies, they build ahead leading up to it, and then they build nothing through that time period, and then they pick up after that. So that's going to be the third thing right before our spring that's going to create another issue for the the supply chain dependency on these imported items. Again, it's not very much of the makeup of the machine, but it only takes a couple parts for these to become big issues. And so that's the reality of part of what we're working through, and kind of what I see happening in the future. As this problem isn't like, although in the US a lot of things are changing and getting back to normal, this is one thing that's not going to get back to normal for a certain amount of time. It's not going to correct as fast as some other products that have corrected a lot more quickly. For example, lumber prices were through the roof for a while, and now lumber is back where it's cheap again. But for the most part, those industries in that cycle all happened within a smaller picture of what's happening domestically between the mills, the retailers, and the builders. And so that whole cycle passed through faster than some of these things that I'm talking about. So what now? Why does this matter? So I think what will happen here is that the U.S. mower business will become more like the European car dealership model. So in Europe, in the U.S., if you go to a car dealership, they've got a couple acres of all kinds of cars, and you go there and you buy a car. It's on, they got a promotion run, you go pick up a car. Now in Europe, they don't do that. Car dealers have a couple select models, maybe you can buy one, but generally you go to the dealer to see the car that you want, and then it's ordered in and you pick it up later. And I think that is going to be how our industry is going to feel for at least the next year. And so what that means is if you wait until there's a lot of equipment on your dealership's showroom or on their lot, it could be too late, or you may never get the equipment that you need. And I think that for the most part, we're going to meet retail demand through spring, but it's not going to be through stockpiled inventories. And I think that's probably something that's going to be true for most of our industry as well. So that's going to be a nuance that's different. And so, like I said, don't wait for inventory to be on the showroom before you make purchase plans, and rather talk with your dealer frequently about what it is that you think you need, what you're willing to commit to, and getting ahead of the plan so that they know, what you need and they can take care of you. Because it's likely that they've got other customers that are buying, or maybe not buying, but they're committing to what's going to be delivered into that dealer. So there could be allocations already on what's coming in, and you want to be part of that picture and their picture of what they have available to you. So plan business ahead of time. The other thing I want to bring up here is that there's always a drive around December to buy equipment before the tax year end. We see it. There's always a little bubble that happens typically between the late, right after Thanksgiving. It kind of starts. So second half of November and December, there's always a bubble of activity that happens there. But if you wait until that bubble happens, you may not get the inventory that you need. So well before Thanksgiving, if you want to buy equipment, and you want to take advantage of accelerated depreciation, start penciling in some rough estimates on where you think your income is and what you think your taxes will be. And if you want to buy equipment to bring down your taxes, write it off. Do that earlier. Don't wait until after Thanksgiving. Actually do it now, because you'll get your best options there. We'll talk about pricing as well in a second here. Now, the problems that I described are more significant if you run a bunch of equipment that's all the same model. Now, if you run a couple pieces of equipment that are different and you can buy, whatever one piece you need, it's not as big of an issue here. But if you need 20 of the same model, that's definitely something that isn't just going to be sitting there to pick up one day. It's something you're going to definitely want to plan ahead of time to get what you need. The other thing I'll mention here is be sure you have some redundancy, whether it's keeping your older equipment up to running condition or buying ahead so you have a backup mower. You don't want to be in a position where you've brought on more work and suddenly you don't have the piece of equipment that you need, for a couple weeks or however long it takes to bring it in, or you have a piece of equipment that breaks down and you need to get jobs done. That's where maybe if you have an older piece of equipment that you have on hand, be sure that it's maintained well, the battery's good, it's in running condition, so that in the event that your primary equipment goes down, you've got options. And I would also say there's some value here in bringing things within your realm of control, because although our parts business is is doing pretty well, pretty caught up right now on everything. But we do have a couple items that have long-term back orders and could be a challenge. And the other thing that I've personally seen a number of situations around is engine lack of availability for engines. And so if you need an engine, if you need to repower a mower, you could be waiting months in some cases for an engine to put on that mower. And so you don't want to be caught in a situation like that. And also, you know, a lot of these things have led to dealers being super busy in their shops. They just can't turn around work, you know, within a couple days or even a week. And so having backup equipment can be valuable. If you don't have backup equipment, then, you know, being sure you buy new equipment so you've got, you know, enough resources to work with can become an important part of creating resiliency within your business. So keep that in mind as well. You know, and am I trying to create hype? The answer is no. What I want to do is be clear with what's happening across our entire industry. To some extent, I think we're doing a lot of countermeasures where these types of things affect us less than maybe some other companies. But what I don't want to create hype. In fact, I'm not trying to push anyone to buy a mower right now who doesn't need a mower. And it's actually in our self-interest to sell less machines, because it means that we can rebuild that inventory and that we can fill the you know, specific market needs more precisely. And so I'm saying buy the equipment that you need, but I'm not saying buy stuff that you don't need. And just, you know, we all want to run good, healthy businesses, and that's really what this is about. So the other thing that I'll bring up here is prices, and I'm not talking about our prices. There's nothing for certain happening in that realm of things, but I'm just describing the phenomenon and part of my outlook that I see on our industry as a whole. So material costs were somewhat anticipated to level off. I brought up wood a minute ago. So yeah, wood went through this huge bubble and has come back down. It was somewhat anticipated that we'd see this with a number of commodities, but it's not entirely happened. It seems to not be happening as quickly as expected. And I think there's some indication that it's going to continue to drag on for some amount of time. And what that means is that, you know, in the upstream processes, all the companies involved in making these components or manufacturing equipment can't hold their breath for too long through what some people have called transient inflation. I don't really think inflation characterizes what's happening. I think we're dealing with supply and demand constraints that result in an increase in raw material costs. And in some cases, in these categories, the demand will remain strong for a long time and the prices will stay high. In other categories like wood, it drops back down and supply and demand sorts itself out. So I don't call it inflation, but it is a cost that's stretching out long enough that affects retail prices. And so because this is happening, I think slower, this is resolving slower than a lot of people anticipated, it means that we're going to see likely more price increases through the fall. We saw in our market a number of sizable price increases through the summer, but with what's going on, I'd have to think that this is not the end. We're going to see more through the fall, maybe through the winter. Another thing we may possibly see is that a lot of promotions in the springtime are based on available inventory and the underlying cost basis. So if there isn't a ton of inventory available in our industry, it would likely mean that there'd be less promotions run this spring on top of the increased material costs of production. So I tend to think that right now is where you'll find your best deals. So, you know, oftentimes there's some motivation to wait till spring to see what promotions are available. I tend to think, though, if you're counting on getting your equipment during spring promotions, two things can happen. One is that if you're looking at buying a fleet, that entire fleet that you're looking to round out isn't going to be available. And the second thing is that the promotion isn't there. So I think that's yet another argument to say, really look at the accelerated depreciation, your tax position, well before Thanksgiving, all the way up to today. Begin talking with your dealer about what your equipment needs are, and that you have that plan coming together. And likely it's going to result in better price, better availability, and better resilience in your business because you're not going to be dependent on the equipment that you're running every day. You have a certain amount of equipment available, ready to cycle in. Now, these things that I talk about, I'm talking about in the context of the lawnmower business, but I think it's just as true for the other categories of businesses. And so I hope this is helpful to you. I could be true or could end up being wrong on some of these things. I'm just expressing to you the outlook that I see from the position that I sit in. And like I said, hopefully it's helpful to you as you build your business, and we wish you all the best success the rest of this fall.